I knew that my brother and my mother work as professional public speakers, and it is not surprising to me that they got paid by we. But I did not know the details, and as I said, I should have known the details, and I regret that.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau there saying he should have known more about his family's financial ties to the We charity when deciding to award the organization a multi-million-dollar government contract. Trudeau is apologizing for his role in the controversy surrounding the student grant program, saying he should have recused himself from cabinet discussions about the We charity. Finance Minister Bill Morneau, whose daughter works for that organization, has also apologized later this afternoon for not recusing himself. We will speak with Minister Bardish Chagger about all of that very soon. We're having some connectivity issues reaching her. Let's bring in the opposition to get their take right now. Michael Barrett is the Conservatives' ethics critic. He joins us from Kentville, Ontario, and in Cobalt, Ontario. Charlie Angus is the NDP's ethics critic. Hello to both of you. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Mr. Barrett, why don't I start with you? So the Prime Minister has now apologized for not recusing himself from the cabinet decision to award this contract to We Charity. He says he made a mistake and he regrets it. Do you accept that apology?
This is the same Justin Trudeau that we've seen over the last 5 years that's only sorry when he gets caught. Just 4 days ago, he unapologetically informed Canadians that he didn't recuse himself from this decision. And this is a billion-dollar program, nearly $1 billion, awarded to this group with direct ties to himself, his wife, his mom, his brother. And the finance minister has family members who work there as well. And it wasn't until the ethics commissioner investigation was initiated, it wasn't until the RCMP was mentioned, and it wasn't until all the opposition parties now on 3 different committees are taking a look at this issue that suddenly the Prime Minister is sorry, even though he's been found guilty twice before of breaking this act, and the finance minister keeps him in company there, having been found guilty of breaking the act as well.
Mr. Angus, the first time that the Prime Minister addressed questions about whether or not he recused himself, it was before the revelations around how much money had been paid to his mother and brother. It's about $282,000 in combination together. Could it have been, is it fair to wager a guess that, I mean, he said today he didn't know the details of what they were paid. Once he was made aware of them, could he then have been brought to the point where he apologized today? Like, could it be genuine because of that?
I think the fact that the Prime Minister, when he was asked about how it was possible that the government in the middle of a pandemic privatized a billion-dollar program and gave it to a group that had no previous experience but that had enormous ties to the Trudeau family, and he said, of course I was involved in the discussion, of course. He seemed shocked that anybody would question why he would be involved in a discussion of a contract of this size. The same thing with Mr. Morneau. They don't seem to understand the basic rules of conflict of interest. And I think what's really concerning here is this is now the 3rd time he's been under investigation. There's a culture of ethical permissiveness around the Prime Minister in his office, as though the workings of Parliament are his. You know, it's something for him to just have control over without checks and balances. So I think the apology to me rings very hollow. This is not about him being impolite. This is about him not even bothering to respect the basic conflict of interest rules. But it really, to me, raises questions about what's going on in his office. There has to be, around any sitting Prime Minister, people who know the rule of law, people who know the optics, people who say, I'm sorry, Justin, this is really going to cause a lot of trouble. Do you really want to go ahead with this? We don't seem to have those checks and balances, and I think we need to find out why not.
Mr. Barrett, on the substance of what the Prime Minister said today, it wasn't just an apology, it was specifically an apology for not recusing himself at the outset of any of these discussions. If he had done so, if the Finance Minister had done so as well, would you be okay with awarding this contract?
Well, we have a contract worth almost $1 billion to do what the Canada Summer Jobs Program already does, but that program does it better and is administered by Canada's Professional Public Service. This program paid people less than minimum wage to do jobs that they could have been offered with the Canada Summer Jobs Program. Conservatives asked the Liberal government to double the funding for that Canada Summer Jobs program. They said no. They invented this program out of thin air, worth $912 million, and awarded it to this firm that, as Mr. Angus said, has no experience doing this kind of thing. So no, this isn't. This is a lot bigger than just saying sorry, for sure.
Two things there. The government did substantially increase the funding to the Canada Summer Jobs program through their pandemic measures. And it's not a $1 billion contract. The program is $900 million, but the contract was worth $19.5 million. I take your points. I just want to make sure that that information is out there. Mr. Angus, the same question to you. If, in fact, the Prime Minister had recused himself, which he now acknowledges he should have done, and so had Bill Morneau, the two people who are alleged to have this, very specific conflict of interest, would you be okay with the contract going out as it had?
Well, I think if this contract passed the smell test, when questions started to be asked about it, both the government and the We Charity would have gone public, sat down and explained what they were doing. They ran for cover. I mean, this program didn't seem to stand the slightest breeze of public scrutiny. The fact is that during this pandemic, we have all worked across party lines to make sure that government programs are happening. They're happening in a timely manner. We've seen extraordinary, unprecedented work in this public service. And every member of Parliament was contacted numerous times by Canada Summer Jobs saying, can you find other businesses, organizations, ways of hiring students? We provided enormous lists, and we were working very closely with Canada Summer Jobs because we believed that that's where the funds were going to be going. Suddenly that was all shelved. And all the organizations in my region, they kept calling me and saying, can we get these young students hired? And instead, a plan to hire people less than minimum wage, which is maybe illegal. Did Bardish Chagger get any kind of legal advice on whether this plan would stand any kind of legal scrutiny? Because you're hiring people at much less than the minimum wage. There seemed to be no plan. And what I think is really galling to me is while we have the Prime Minister giving himself the pity pot story today about being sorry and, I'm just trying to do my best, none of that money's gotten out the door. We have. Do
you think they should keep the program? Sorry to interrupt. I just want to. Do you think they should keep the program?
He promised this program in April. He interfered. The Liberal government interfered with a program that could have been done through Canada Summer Jobs. He needed to stand up and say, I'm sorry, this is a disaster. I'm wearing this. I get it. This is my responsibility. That is a credible apology, and say that money will be going out the door through Canada Summer Jobs. I guarantee it. But none of that has happened. And so I don't really get the pity story of Justin Trudeau. Leadership is about saying, I did something really wrong here. We shouldn't have done this. We shouldn't have derailed the emergency funding that was in place to help post-secondary students. And we need to address that because students have massive levels of debt and amazing levels of insecurity right now.
Mr. Barrett, I know the Conservatives want the Prime Minister to appear before Commons Committee, the Finance Committee. He was asked about that today. He didn't say no. He didn't say yes. He said he would consider the invite. Mr. Poilievre, the finance critic, has said that, your party's finance critic rather, had said that you would then introduce a motion if he were to say no, the Prime Minister were to say no, to compel him to appear. Is that still the case? And can you inform us a bit about the timeline of how that might work?
Well, we're going to add the Prime Minister to the witness list for that committee. And look, if he's sorry, he can offer to the Finance Committee to appear, and he can commit to not invoke cabinet confidence, which we know he did during the SNC-Lavalin scandal, which was the second time he was found to have broken the Conflict of Interest Act. And in that case, the commissioner outlined in his report that there were up to 9 people who wanted to provide evidence and testimony, and the Prime Minister would not allow them to do that. He obstructed the efforts to get to the bottom of it. So the Prime Minister has the opportunity to now present himself, as does the Finance Minister, to the Finance Committee and say, I'm available to testify, at the committee's request, and then to provide the contract details, to provide any correspondence, and not to run the clock on the 30 days that the Finance Committee started with their original request for documents, but to make this initial request. Sure, if it goes to the House and the House instructs the Prime Minister to attend, he can still invoke cabinet confidence, which he should not be able to do. He did it last time, and if he's sorry this time, he won't do that.
Mr. Angus, a quick final question to you. If the Prime Minister declines the invitation to appear before the committee, would you support a Conservative motion to compel him to do so?
Well, we will see what happens. I think the Prime Minister needs to take accountability. I will be introducing a motion at Ethics to ask Katie Telford to appear, because how is it possible that the people around the Prime Minister, who have already allowed him to be convicted twice for not standing up for the most basic, simple facts of recusal, conflict of interest, what is within the culture of the Prime Minister's office that this kind of behavior goes on? I certainly think we need to hear from his chief of staff, his right hand, and certainly I'm looking forward for the Privy Council. I mean, how do they watch a finance minister dealing on $1 billion deal while one of his family members works there? Same with the Prime Minister's family members, employees of an organization that he's dealing with and defending. There's got to be some checks and balances to keep this Prime Minister from causing more harm to himself.
Okay, I've got to leave it there. I'm out of time. Thank you very much to both of you for your time this evening, Michael Barrett and Charlie Angus. We're going to swing immediately now to the minister responsible for the Canada Student Service Grant. Bardish Chagger is the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth. She joins us from Waterloo in Ontario. I'm glad we successfully reached you, Minister. Thank you very much for making time for us.
Thank you for having me.
Minister, were you aware that the Prime Minister's mother and brother had received payments for speaking engagements from the We Charity when the sole source contract for the charity came up at the cabinet table?
So if I can just take a step back, the purpose, which remains the purpose, was to connect students who want to improve their skills and contribute their skills with not-for-profits who have an increased demand of services, partner them up through the Canada Student Service Grant. We gave the project to the public service. The public service came forward with a recommendation. The recommendation they made was that We Charity would be able to make this program available to students and not-for-profits, including providing the necessary supports that would be needed, and we accepted the recommendation. At the time of the decision, I'm not aware of the Prime Minister's extended family's financial arrangements.
Should you have been aware? Did you ask any questions at the time when you were considering whether or not to accept that recommendation from the public service?
Yeah, for sure. I will tell you, many questions were posed from many cabinet ministers, including from myself as well as the team, to ensure that checks and balances were in place. And that's why it was important that the contribution agreement that was signed ensure that the privacy of individuals be protected, and to ensure that there was training involved, because we do have to be able to comply with the COVID context to ensure the health and safety of people participating. So there was many checks and balances put in place. Our public service is very hardworking, and when they come forward with the proposal, they have put all the checks in place before they make a recommendation.
Respectfully, though, my question is actually very specific to, you get this proposal from the public service. Do you then turn to the Prime Minister, knowing his extensive history with this organization, and say, hey, Prime Minister, is this really, is this going to pass the smell test? Do you have anything that you need to declare that we need to have out in the open before we accept this recommendation? Like, did you ask those questions?
So I asked those questions of the public service to ensure that all checks and balances had been put into place. I asked if there was any other organizations that could deliver the program, looking at the timeline in which the program needed to be delivered, looking at working with third parties, which we have done on numerous occasions, previous governments have as well. The reach of this organization was one that would allow this program to be successful. And once those checks and balances were in place, we accepted their recommendation.
So are you saying that the public service told you that the Prime Minister did not have any conflict pertaining to this organization?
I'm telling you that when it came to asking questions to ensure that the program would be successful, I asked those questions of the public service to see if there were any other options, to see that checks and balances were in place to ensure that this organization would be able to satisfy the degree of the program that we wanted. It's a very innovative program, first of its kind. As you know, we're in a very unprecedented and challenging time, and we recognize that not-for-profits have an increased demand for their services. It's something we've been hearing. We also hear that there are students that want to strengthen their skills, and many of these students were already volunteering, contributing to their communities, so we looked at an opportunity for them to partner up. This program is part of a suite of programs that we have made available to students, recognizing that there is a diverse set of needs that students have. So we put forward the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. We also increased Canada Student Grants, because we know that come the fall there will be many costs affiliated with returning to school. We also have the Canada Summer Jobs Program, which we increased, and then we gave employers actually 100% of wages being covered. And then there are students that would be hired because they have graduated or they have owned their skills. And there's also students who are still developing skills, and that's where students are able to volunteer, give back.
I get that.
Was another program being offered.
I understand, Minister, and I made a lot of those points to the opposition around the programs that you have put forth for students, but really my questions are there's a whole discussion that can be had around the merits of those programs. The Prime Minister today apologized for not recusing himself and said he regretted that he didn't get the details of the payments made to his mother and his brother. I just asked you if you asked those questions of him. You said you asked them of the public service. Did you ask whether or not the Prime Minister's relatives had been paid by we? You asked those questions, and then am I to take from that you were told they did not, that basically you were told there would not be a conflict?
For myself, what I was asking was the focus that was mine, was making sure that students had programs that would assist them and that they would be able to assist communities so that they would have some of the financial means they will need in the fall. We know it's a very unprecedented and challenging time. We know that everyone has been impacted by COVID-19, and we know that there's certain communities that have been disproportionately impacted. My focus was on students and ensuring that they have a suite of programs available to them, and that's why I was asking the necessary questions to ensure that the program be successful.
Respectfully, you're not answering me specifically, though. Did you ask? I understand you asked questions about students. You wanted the program to be successful. Did you ask about the Prime Minister's conflict of interest?
Directly, I did not ask anyone other conflict of interest, and that's why today when the Prime Minister came forward, he apologized, and he also shared that he really regrets the fact that students are not able to take advantage of service opportunities right now, that not-for-profits are not able to use the skill sets that students have to offer. And that's why it's really important that we remain focused on delivering for Canadians. And that's what our focus has been on day one. My focus was on ensuring that the program be successful and that the program be available to students and not-for-profits during this very challenging time.
Do you understand, though, Minister, why Canadians would have questions about sitting around the cabinet table when this recommendation came forth? Sure, you're evaluating it from the perspective of success for students, and that's understandable. But when you're making a decision to award a $20 million contract for a nearly $1 billion program, surely ministers, including yourself, would have thought, let's make sure, given the Prime Minister's history with this organization, that it will pass the sniff test, that it won't be derailed by questions around ethics. Why didn't you ask those questions?
So obviously, the way this unfolded is not what was intended, and the charity is no longer administering the program. I was focused on the program, ensuring that we get it out the door. We have heard from many people who are waiting for this program. As you know, the Prime Minister had announced the I Want to Help portal, so we wanted to see it launched, but we want to ensure that the health and safety of the people participating would also always remain a priority, and that's where my focus was. My focus was on delivering for Canadians a program that would work for students and for not-for-profits, and that's why you've seen that members of all parties have asked for us to appear at the Finance Committee. That motion has passed. We will be there to ensure that that information is received. The opposition has asked for the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner to investigate this matter. We have stated that we will comply with any information that is needed. That is something that we've always done. Our focus is on delivering for Canadians, recognizing that we need to get a suite of programs out the door in a very limited time. And that's where my focus was. Can we do better, Vashi? Yes, we can do better. Should I have asked more questions in regards to people's personal situations? I recognize now that I should have, and I will be more mindful of that moving forward. Just
on that point that you made just prior to that last statement around being forthcoming at committee and with the information, I just want to be unequivocal because you, along with the Prime Minister, have talked about the recommendation that came from the public service. And obviously, there's a motion at that committee to see that recommendation before them, the evidence of it. Can you be specific for us? Is there a piece of paper that exists that says, we is the only group that can administer this program, and will you make that piece of paper public?
So what we will be doing is ensuring that at committee, all of the information that we can make available will be available for committee members to see. I will be appearing at committee, as will the members of the public service that they have asked to appear.
Is there a piece of paper, Minister, that says we is the only charity that can administer this program?
So I'll tell you, it was a recommendation that was made. The public service works really hard. They're really good at papering up and providing recommendations in writing. And that's usually how the process unfolds. We will make sure all that information is made available. The public service themselves have stated that that was the recommendation that they made, recognizing that that was the organizations that they were not only recommending, but was the organization that would be able to deliver this massive program in a very limited period of time. And the organization they recommended, they acknowledged that they felt had the skill set that was needed. They had the reach that was needed. We charity, we organization, they are present in 7,000 schools across the country. They have a reach of 2.4 million students. And when you're working to ensure that many students as possible are able to participate, as well as many not-for-profits, we were looking for a third party that would be able to deliver for Canadians.
If that document is covered by cabinet confidence, will your government waive it so that it can be produced for the public to see?
Bashi, I will be doing my best to ensure that the information that the committee is looking for is received. That has been my goal from day one. And my goal also from day one has been to ensure that Canadians receive the programs and services they need. That's been the focus of our government. And if you look at since March, the number of programs we've come out with, the work we've done to be there for Canadians, our focus will remain to be there for Canadians. And that's why we're working really hard to see how we can maneuver this program and have it be delivered so that students can develop their skills, volunteer and help heal communities, as well as receive a grant, as well as not-for-profits who are really have a higher demand for their services and are needing people to help. So to be able to partner them up and be able to help our communities that are looking for that assistance right now.
Do you have any idea right now how much the program might be delayed by? Like how, do you have any kind of updated timeline for people watching?
I'll tell you that there's a lot of regret that the program is being delayed. And so we are working around the clock to have that program come out as soon as possible. It's unfortunate that there has been delays, and that's why we will remain focused on getting the program out the door, one that works for not-for-profits as well as students.
The Ethics Commissioner is investigating this, Minister, right now. What do you say to Canadians who are watching and now looking at 3 ethics investigations in total, wondering if they can trust your government to make ethical decisions in Canada's best interest, not your government's best interest?
So I'll say that our focus has always been the best interest of Canadians, and you can see that within the programs and services we put out. I would also say that from day one, we've been clear when it comes to officers of Parliament, agents of Parliament, we will work closely with them to ensure that they have all of the information they require, and we will continue to work with them to make that information available.
Okay, I'm out of time. Thank you so much, Minister. Appreciate your time this evening as always.
Thank you.
I made a mistake in not recusing myself immediately from the discussions, given our family's history. And I'm sincerely sorry.
We know that Justin Trudeau is only sorry when he gets caught, and that's what the apology was all about today.
When I was a kid and I did something wrong, my mom and my dad asked me to ask for forgiveness and say I was sorry. And I used to say that I would not do it again. The Prime Minister seems to have forgotten the second part of it, and he always does it again and again and again.
Welcome back to Power and Politics. The Prime Minister, as you heard there, apologized this morning over his failure to recuse himself when his cabinet decided to award a $20 million contract to the We charity. The organization was tapped to manage a $900 million youth grant program. Trudeau admitted today he knew his mother and brother got paid to speak at events, and he wouldn't be surprised to find out they've received money from We, but he insisted that he didn't know the details of how much they were paid. The apology, though, did little to blunt criticism from the opposition. The Conservatives continue to call for a criminal investigation, and the Bloc wants the Prime Minister to step aside until the Ethics Commissioner has investigated. Will today's apology change anything for Canadians? Time for the Power Panel to weigh in on that. From west to east, over in Vancouver, Shachi Curl is the Executive Director of the Angus Reid Institute. In Toronto, Melissa Lantzman is National Vice President of Enterprise Canada, and Yolande James, former Quebec Liberal Cabinet Minister, joins us from Montreal. Hi there. Great to see all three of you.
Hello.
Yolande, I'm going to start with you. How far do you think this apology goes?
Well, it's certainly not going to put the issue to bed. That's for sure. I think the Prime Minister had to give a some kind of response. Just watching the members of his government or even him last week insisting on, well, it was a recommendation of the civil servants was not enough. But that being said, of course, the opposition are going to continue to hammer on this, as Liberals would do had the shoe be on the other foot. I'm saying that wrong, but you catch what I'm trying to say. But for sure, it won't go away for a number of reasons. It's a question of the decision. How was the decision made? I think for a lot of people, Liberals are not. They're wondering how could, first, for the immensity of the contract be given in such a way where there was no additional scrutiny done, given the fact that there's a proximity with members of his family. So of course he's in a bad spot here, but ultimately, is he going to be able to, and that will be whenever the election takes place, will he be able to show Canadians that when you take, yes, it's not a perfect government, but when you take the list of the pluses versus the minuses, notably the way that he's been able to handle the pandemic, that the Canadians will choose his government again. But there's no way to look at this. Anyhow you look at it, it's not positive for the government.
Yeah, Melissa, I want to get into a discussion in a bit about sort of the maybe potential longer term effects. But on those questions maybe that remain, that aren't answered, one thing Yolande said jumped out at me, this whole idea of like how and why was the decision made? Why weren't those... I mean, the Prime Minister admitted today, I should have asked those questions. I should have known the details. I didn't. I regret it. It took me a lot of questions to get out of Minister Chagger as well, that she didn't ask specifically, hey, Prime Minister, you have a connection. What is the extent of that connection? No, it appears that nobody did. Does that surprise you at all? Or do you think that makes sense, given what you know about being on the inside of government?
It actually makes no sense. And I would be, if I was in PMO, I would certainly be nervous about the fact that nobody tells the boss that maybe you're too close to this. And then the second boss, the finance minister, maybe you're too close to this. There's a whole lot of people not doing their jobs. And the question is whether that's on purpose or not. I think in terms of an apology, I don't think this issue is put to bed, and that the fact that the apology came almost a week after, we've been talking about this now since last Tuesday, shows that the government tried everything else before yet another apology from the Prime Minister. He apologized sort of at every ethics breach, and it didn't. In those cases, it went away. But again, this one is really easy to understand, and it's really easy to understand that something didn't go right here. And there's a lot of questions still unanswered that an apology is not going to put to bed. The timeline that you flag, I think, is important to highlight for our viewers. And Shachi, I want to get you to weigh in as well on how Canadians from your polling are perceiving this. Because initially when the contract was awarded, already there were questions just by virtue of the Prime Minister and his wife, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau's connection to the organization. So they appear at events. The organization at first said nobody was paid. We know that Justin Trudeau's mother, as well as brother, had also spoken at various events. But for a number of days, people were under the impression that nobody was paid. Last Wednesday, the Prime Minister was asked, did you recuse yourself from these discussions? He said no, and he went on to talk about the virtues of the program. The day after that is when it was revealed that in fact, no, Margaret Trudeau as well as Alexandra Trudeau were paid, together nearly $300,000 in the last, from 2016 to 2020. So while Justin Trudeau was the Prime Minister, and then the weekend passes, and then we arrive at today when this apology comes out. I just don't want to take for granted that all our viewers are sort of, as closely following it as the rest of us up here are. Shachi, what are you hearing from Canadians? What are your polls telling you about their feelings on this story?
So lots to unpack, right? Lots of details, lots to unpack, lots of unanswered questions. But for Canadians who are on the beginning of their summer vacations or staycations, whatever that looks like, all they really need to follow and track is this is once again an example of the Prime Minister perhaps behaving in a way in which the rules do not exactly apply to him, or he's certainly emoting that, and finding himself in the crosshairs of yet a third ethics investigation. So the polling is showing in the early days of this news unfolding a slip of 5 points in approval levels. Look, if you're a Liberal strategist, you're going to say, we'll take the 5 points. If you are in the opposition, you smell blood, because again, these are very early days. And this story, a little bit in the same way that SNC-Lavalin did, I think has the potential to keep rolling, depending on what the opposition chooses to do with it. What's notable in these early results is a couple of things. It shows us how the country is again starting to divide on the question of Justin Trudeau's leadership. So a big gender divide, Vashi. Women still firmly, a majority of them saying, we're sticking with him, we approve of him. 58% are saying that they do so. Men, 41% only saying the same thing. So an almost 20-point gap between men and women on this issue. Politically, if you are someone on the left of the political spectrum, Liberal, NDP bloc, you're still more likely to identify issues of public health, COVID-19, and the associated economic issues as at the top of your priority list, along with climate change, if you're really on the left of that spectrum. For those on the right, past Conservative voters, much more likely to be identifying as their top priorities in this polling, ethics and accountability. And that is where you start to see the divide, and that is where I think a lot of different factors at play in terms of how politics in Canada shakes out translates into a 5-point slip. But here's what's really important. His base is with him. There's been absolutely no change among past Liberal voters. Among past NDP and past Conservative voters, you see declines of 9 and 7 points respectively. So again, this moment of national unity around how we feel about Justin Trudeau in the last 3 months in terms of how he's dealt with COVID, starting to ebb away as COVID becomes more normalized, and we start to see sort of old school politics rising to the surface and new issues rising to the surface that are really old issues. They're just a lot of people are just remembering why they were so annoyed with him to begin with.
Okay, I have to press pause for a few minutes. Yolanda, I'm going to get to you right. I just have to take a quick commercial break, but we're going to keep the discussion going. Stay with us. We're back with the Power Panel in just a moment. Welcome back to Power and Politics with the Power Panel. We are discussing what else but the government's decision to award a $20 million contract to manage a $900 million student grant program to the We charity, a charity the Prime Minister and some of his relatives have extensive connections to. This morning, the Prime Minister issued an apology for not recusing himself from cabinet discussions around the decision to award that contract. Shachi Kurl is with us, as well as Melissa Lantsman and Yolande James. Yolande, I'm going to start with you because I cut you so rudely off to take a commercial break, but you were about to jump in on Shachi, giving us a bit of a sense from her polling about how Canadians thus far are reacting to this.
Yes, and what I was going to add, Vashi, is that I feel like judge what the impact of this this latest issue.
I think I'm having a bit of trouble hearing you. You keep sorry, Yolanda. You keep cutting in and out. Maybe we'll try it one more time. Do you mind starting again?
Can you hear me now?
Now I can. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, now you're cutting out. Okay, I'm gonna. Hopefully, the control room can try to reestablish a connection. I'm gonna jump over to. Sorry, you keep cutting in and out, and I apologize. We're not hearing your full sentences. So I'll jump over to Melissa and just get her to weigh in first, and we'll try to reestablish a bit of a connection. Melissa, what were your thoughts on the numbers presented by Shachi?
Look, I don't think this is necessarily something that would make a government fall, especially because we don't have the mechanism of Parliament to get down to the answers. But I do think it's incumbent on the government to prove its case. If this was a recommendation by the public service, which, frankly, if you've been on the inside of a government, it's hard to believe that a public service would recommend we, and only we, to administer a program it has never administered against a bureaucracy who has administered such a program for 70,000 students called the Summer Jobs Program. It is, if the Liberals really wanted to put this to bed, they would They would make that recommendation public. They would make the discussions at Cabinet public and really give Canadians the confidence that there was no wrongdoing here, except for the fact that the Prime Minister recused himself. But that's only a small issue of this, and I think it plagues the Liberals in their Achilles heel of arrogance. And this is frankly where it comes from.
Yolande, let me try you again. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, it's okay. I was just going to say that it's really difficult, I think, for us to, at this point, determine what exactly the impact will be of this latest bad judgment. And I think that that's the risk for the government at this point. I remember in the midst of SNC-Lavalin, yes, a minority government, the government was reelected. And that is not, I say that not because I feel like the government should minimize this. To the contrary, Melissa is correct on the fact that the issue with respect to how and why this contract was awarded or to we will stay in the media unless more answers are given. My question is more to see is in terms as we're looking forward, how will Canadians, what will be at the forefront of their concerns? Generally across the province, not only for the Prime Minister, but for a lot of premiers.
I think you cut out.
People having.
Sorry, we're having a day with connections. It's just a fun Monday. It really feels like a Monday. Shachi, I'll bring you back in as well, because on that sort of, I think Yolande's basic point that it'll be a while before we can really assess what the more long-term impact of this is, particularly on the government and on the Liberals. Based on what you've seen just initially, I mean, kind of what you were describing is it has hurt the Prime Minister initially, but very much in the way that it almost seemed SNC did by the end, which is like distinct camps, right? If you already felt a certain way, and I know this even from my own conversations, if you don't like the Prime Minister, this really substantiates some of the reasons you don't. If you support the Liberals, you will likely not turn to another party because of this. But I have had a lot of senior Liberals really express disappointment, like here we are again of our own making, and a little bit of frustration too.
And I think that sentiment really speaks to the sense of vulnerability that the Liberals and senior Liberals and others may have within that tent that maybe they didn't have going into the last election. The difference this time around, the change, is that we are on the precipice of seeing a newly elected Conservative leader. We know all of the things that Andrew Scheer failed to do and execute on in the last election that essentially saw that party and that leader squander the greatest political gift it had been ever given, arguably any party had ever been given, and really fail to capitalize on that and win the last election. So Justin Trudeau survives that because the alternative, the other guy, so to speak, is not someone that moderate voters felt that they could go to and that they had a choice in. If we see a leader emerge at the helm of the Conservative Party in coming times who says, look, if you're annoyed at Justin Trudeau, but you thought that the Conservative Party in the past was not a party that could be big tent or found itself tripped up on social values issues, rather than issues of ethics, accountability, transparency, economic and fiscal management, then come on over and try us. And we do tend to see a phenomenon where new leaders are often given a benefit of the doubt. They're sampled a little bit. People want to kick the tires and try them out. And if they like what they see, that will be the challenge for Justin Trudeau and for this government. So lots of known unknowns. Polling, as we all know, is a snapshot in time. This is the snapshot in time, but there are a whole bunch of other X factors that we have to sort of watch and see for. How much will the apology have made a difference? How much will the fact that this has happened in the middle of summer make a difference? Will it all be forgotten? And how much will new Conservative leadership, when the time comes, be able to capitalize on this, or will it be a moment lost to time. And as we've talked about, that entrenching of, if you like the guy, this is water off a duck's back. If you don't like him, it just ticks you up even further, but ultimately doesn't change or move the dial all that much.
Melissa, what do you think about that sort of third point that Shachi made around the new leader, whomever it will be, of the Conservative Party, and their potential ability or lack thereof to capitalize on this? What do you expect the outcome of that will be?
Well, look, I think it's an acceptable position to have amongst the Canadian public, that the next leader of the Conservative Party could very well be Prime Minister. And I think that Sachi said this at the beginning of her her last statement, saying that there is blood in the water, that this is yet another transgression by the Prime Minister on a matter of ethics. This one is easy to understand. It's his family getting direct benefits from a charity that then was awarded a contract to administer a program that the government should have administered themselves. You don't even have to have that last part in there. I think the first part is damning enough for a Prime Minister who continues to apologize because he got caught, not because he's sorry.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.